when you first sign in, you'll have the option to either sign in or register. I do already have an account, so I'll go to that. Now, users do have the option to create a project without registering. However, we do not encourage people to do this, because if you don't create an account and you take you spend a lot of time inputting all your data, and then you navigate away from your page, or you step away and your computer goes to sleep, you might lose all of the data that you just spent a bunch of time inputting. And we don't want that to happen to people. So it's much easier to just register. It takes, 30 seconds. And then you can save a project and return to it, which is super useful. Once you sign in, you'll see you have a kind of project repository on your left-hand side. For me, I have lots of projects. If you're a new user, you wouldn't have anything there. If I wanted to create a project from scratch, I would go all the way to the bottom and say create new project. And then I would be asked to select which activities I'm interested in accounting for. And you can select as many or as few as you want. Because this is a animal ag demo presentation, I'm going to focus on animal ag, and I'm actually going to create a demo project. And in a demo project, a lot of the data is auto-populated, and that just saves me time in trying to make sure I get to everything to show you. I can actually only have one demo project running at a time, so I have to delete my old one in order to, okay, it's getting mad at me. So I have to delete this old demo project, and then I'll say, create demo project. I'll select animal ag. When it doesn't have the beef next to it, the understanding is that it's dairy. And I'll say create. And regardless of if it's a demo project or a project from scratch, once you create it, it's going to end up at the very bottom of your project repository, and it will be highlighted in dark gray. And then I would select define activities, and that's what would open up my project. These pop-ups are relevant only to the demo, so you don't have to pay attention to this. So the first step when you start your animal ag project is to enter your zip code or your property location. This is used for weather data within the context of your manure and housing management. If your cattle are on pasture or rangeland, the weather data isn't used, but you do still have to enter your zip code. So in this default, this is defaulted to Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, but because I was presenting before from Larimer County, I'm going to switch it to that. And again, that's just going to affect weather data. Next, if this were not a demo project, these would be available to be clicked on. But because it is a demo, you'll see that my animal category types have already been selected. So we're looking at dairy dry cows, dairy heifer replacement, and dairy lactating cows. But if you were starting a project from scratch, you could select any variation of those. At the bottom, you'll see the option to either save and continue or to set a baseline period. If you're new to COMET-Farm, we highly recommend starting with a single year of accounting. And that will mean that your baseline is 1 year and your scenario or your change in management is 1 year. The only reason you'd want to set your baseline using this orange button here is if you're managing your animals differently from year to year and you're experienced with COMET-Farm. At the end in your report, your results are going to be presented as average annual tons of CO2 equivalent anyway. So it won't matter if that's over 1 year or 5 years, so long as your management is staying consistent. So again, I'm just going to save and continue so that I'm working with that one single year of accounting. So next, you'll be asked to define your herds. You can add up to 5 herds per animal category. You can see that this panel here on the left is going to be really helpful for helping you keep track of where in your project you are. So you can see I'm working with my dairy heifer replacements. Herds are only relevant for cattle, not other types of animals. And they're defined as groups of animals within the same category that are handled differently in terms of things like how they're fed, how they're housed, where they spend most of their time, or how their manure is handled. So if I wanted to add an additional herd, I would just click this plus button. I could name my herd, but for the sake of time in this demo project, I'm not going to do that. Then I'll just press save and continue. Next, I'll be asked questions about my animals' details. So particularly where my animals are spending their time. And essentially that's by month. So I'm selecting between roofed facility, dry lot, and pasture range. And again, because this is a demo, that's why this 85 is already here, whereas typically everything on this page would say 0. So if I wanted to change this, I could. It's because a demo project has information inputted already, doesn't mean I can't change it. And a shortcut that I like to point out is if that number is staying the same across all months, I can select this little copy button and that'll change it all across the board. For the sake of keeping the demo consistent, I'll revert it back to what it's supposed to be. So yeah, then you're asked some questions such as daily feed intake, average live body weight. Those questions might vary depending on what animal you're working with. So you'll see, in fact, I think even with dried dairy cows, or maybe it's dairy lactating cows. Yeah, when I select dairy lactating cows and go to that same page, I'm asked an additional 2 questions. So pay attention to what animal category you're working with so that you recount what information you're being asked. Also worth noting that the way I'm clicking around all of these is that these tabs and panels are all interactive. You can just proceed through using save and continue, but sometimes I like to skip around. So that's useful for that. Next, you'll be asked to input the types of feed for your cattle. The responsibility is 100% on the user to enter accurate or realistic information, and that goes for all of the data you're entering. So for all we know, you can enter that you're feeding your cattle 100% coffee ground every day of the year, and the model is still going to run. So the only reason I say that is just to say, if you get funky results, it's possible that there was just a strange thing that was entered by the user, because the model is going to run regardless, so long as there's information for every entry. So this table is a little bit complicated to use, but essentially, if your animals are being fed something different at different times of the year, let's say they're eating something different for May, June, July, and August, you select those months. Then you scroll down and select kind of the overarching feed stuff. So let's say we're giving them alfalfa, then you can get a little bit more specific about what type of alfalfa, and then you would press add. Again, because this is a demo project, all of that is already input. In this case, the cows are eating the same thing all year round, which probably isn't the most realistic, but it's what the demo has. I'll also take this opportunity to share that we are hoping to undergo a website redesign sometime in this fall and winter to make this a lot more user-friendly. So keep an eye out for that. It's all, of course, driven by the Blue Book being updated, so stay tuned. The last question on feed stuff is just once you've selected all of the feed that you're providing, you have to allocate those into percentages that add up to 100. So again, this demo project has luckily done the math for me, so I don't have to. And then you would click done to save the feed types. So now we'll be asked how manure is handled within your housing type. You'll remember on that first panel that for my dairy heifer replacements, I just had 85 in my roofed facility all year round. So that's why roofed facility is the only thing that's selected right now. From there, it'll ask follow-up questions based on that selection. So based on the fact that I chose roofed facility, it's then going to ask me questions about my manure being pit storage, bedded, pack, flushed, or scraped. These do have little info buttons next to them for definitions if you're unclear or you're not sure which category it would fall into. And then you get questions such as the area of the barn floor covered with manure in square feet. And then you can just enter that in. And again, every time I switch to a new page, I like to make sure I'm still working on the animal category that I'm interested in working on, because sometimes it can swap around which herd or which animal category you're working with. So just keep tabs on that panel. Next, it'll ask for manure system type details. So it'll ask about things like your solid liquid separator. Based on whether you say yes or no, it's going to ask you more follow-up questions. In this demo project, I'm using a roller press as a separator. I'm removing about 25% of solids, treating the solids as compost, and treating the liquid in an anaerobic lagoon. You might recall from my presentation that this demo project involves switching from an anaerobic lagoon to an anaerobic digester and seeing how that affects our emissions. So that's why this demo project already has an anaerobic lagoon selected. So we're going to see how that proceeds. I'll switch to the next, and these questions are going to again pertain to your previous selections. So because I selected composting for my solid treatment and an anaerobic lagoon for my liquid treatment, I'm asked some more detailed questions about composting and my anaerobic lagoon. So if you don't see these questions, it's likely because you made a different selection than I did. So again, we're asked things like our composting method, the system's cover type, the exposed surface area, what year the anaerobic lagoon was established, the amount of time between cleanouts, and then the percent of solid removal. So lots of details, and that's why we talk about COMET-Farm being a little bit more time intensive. The last question for this animal category is for manure details, and these values, regardless of whether you do a demo project or from scratch, are likely going to be filled in automatically. These values are frequently defaulted by COMET. However, anytime COMET defaults a value, users can always edit them. So if you don't be startled if you come to a page and there's already data entered into the window for you, you can always go in and edit it as far as I'm concerned. All right, so we are on the last entry of information for our first animal category. So if this were a project that I was completing from scratch, when I went to save and continue, it would just bring me to the first page for my next animal category for my first herd. So you can see how time consuming it can be if you're going by animal category, by herd. And so I'm just mentally preparing for the amount of time investment that COMET-Farm can take. Again, with our redesign, we are trying to make it more user-friendly and provide options to like copy your management from one animal category to another. But it's a little difficult because your dairy lactating cows are going to be handled differently than your dairy dry cows, for example. So because this is a demo, most of this information is already input. So when I get to the last page of my data and I press save and continue, instead, it's going to say my baseline is complete. And I'm going to have this option to create a scenario. If I did, so I had mentioned we're switching from an anaerobic lagoon to an anaerobic digester. So I'm going to say new digester. And this button here, I'm waving a big flag about, because this option to copy management from your baseline is going to save you a lifetime of time, essentially. If you're only changing one or two things in your management, such as you're just switching from an anaerobic lagoon to an anaerobic digester, you definitely want to copy your management information from your baseline. Otherwise, you have to manually re-enter all of those same questions again. So I highly, highly encourage you to copy your management information from your baseline. And then you would create new scenario, and it would bring you to your scenario page. Because this is a demo, I'm going to close this, because when you go to the left-hand side over here, you can see that I actually already have my future scenario with the digester install already created, because again, it's a demo. So I'm just going to pop over to that so you can get a sense of what it looks like. What it looks like is exactly the same. So we go to our dairy heifer replacements, our digester install, and you can see that I kept the number of cattle the same. They're still in a roof facility. They're still being fed the same thing. It's only when I go over to my manure system types that you see where it once said anaerobic lagoon, it now says anaerobic digester. And thus, the questions that are asked on the following page are also a little different. So rather than ask all those questions, like the amount of surface covered, what kind of system cover type there was, instead, I'm only asked, what's the digester type? So again, by doing that, I've saved myself a lot of time, because all I would have to go in and do is change this question from anaerobic lagoon to anaerobic digester, and rather than enter all of that same information over again. So highly, highly recommend doing that. You can create more than one scenario. So let's say I wanted to compare what would it be like if I switched to a digester, but also what would it be like if I switched what they were being fed. I could again click new scenario, and I could copy management also from my other scenario. What if I wanted to assess, not only did I install the anaerobic digester, but I also switched what they're being fed? I could copy management from that digester install scenario, and that way I'd only have to go in and change the feed. So again, these are just shortcuts that I like to share. For the sake of time, I'm just going to hop over to our reports page. So again, I was on the last panel of entry. So when I press save and continue, it gives me the option to either create another scenario or continue to report, and I'm going to continue to report. These reports generate pretty much instantaneously, and that's because, again, this is not using DACENT to run. It's just using statistical methods. So if you're sitting and waiting for an animal ag report to run for like minutes, something is wrong. And so use the little need help widget down here to drop us a line, because you should not be waiting a long time for your report to generate. So I'll walk you through what your report looks like. Down the left-hand side, you have your overarching animal categories, and then you have your herds. So again, I only had 3 types of animals, and I only had 1 herd each. I can expand those categories to see the source and subsource emissions. So that's what's kind of going down below. Again, I can even double click. Oh, I thought I could. I can't, never mind. Oh, they're already expanded, duh. So you can see source and then subsource categories. You can see equations next to those sources as well. Again, this is not an exhaustive list of the equations that were used to calculate the value that you're seeing. Some intermediate equations were likely used, but it still provides some information. Then along the top, you see your baseline, and then you'll see your scenario. So again, your baseline is your current management, your business as usual, and then your scenario is that change in management that you're hoping to assess. In this case, it's the switch from the anaerobic lagoon to the anaerobic digester. The change column is what most users are most interested in, and that is your change in emissions as a result of your change in management. So here we can see that total across all of our herds of all of our animals at the very bottom, we are reducing our emissions by 360.8 metric tons of CO2 equivalent. So again, all of our results are generated in terms of metric tons of CO2e, and that's across all of our accounting activities. And the other thing I was going to point out is I highlighted on Comet Planner what your results look like in terms of they were those blue positive values is how reductions were denoted, whereas in this case, a reduction in emissions is denoted as a negative value shown in green, whereas a positive value shown in red would refer to an increase in emissions. The last thing I'll show you just for 1 minute, and then we'll open the floor for questions, is this Interpret Animal Ag report. I threw a lot of information at you, and so if you want clarification on how to interpret your report, we have this nice little infographic that tells you what your values mean, and so that can be really helpful. Similarly, we have the option to download a detailed report where you can see the management that you entered, see those changes in emissions, and keep on file for yourself. It's also a really good option for troubleshooting. If you see a result that you think is a little funky, sometimes downloading that detailed report helps you kind of see where the issue is originating from.